everyone, I'm Abigail. This is James, and welcome to another Two Kids interview.
We are joined by Newbury medal-winning author Lynne Ray Perkins.
Ms. Perkins has written picture books, a young adult novel, as easy as falling off the face of the earth.
The middle grade novels Violet and Joby in the Wild, Secret Sisters of the Salty Sea, Nuts to You, All Alone in the Universe.
And of course, the Newbury medal-winning book, Criss.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You have written books where the main characters are animals. Why do you enjoy that? And what is the most challenging thing about writing animals?
I think the interesting thing about animals is that they're not really animals. They're stand-ins for people. And but it is kind of interesting that they live in different situations than we do. So it's fun to try to think about what it would be like to be in that situation and how you would handle it. For example, Violet and Joby in the Wild started because a friend of mine had mice in her kitchen and she caught a mouse live. She didn't know what to do with it. She said, if I put it outside, it's just going to come right back in the house. So a group of her friends told her, well, you need to drive it far away from your house and set it free. And so I was thinking about like to be a mouse dropped into the wilderness, didn't have any skills to survive. So that's why I started writing that story.
You illustrate your own books. Do your illustrations ever make you rethink something and change the story?
That's a really good question. When I'm writing, I don't always write the whole story and then do the illustrations later. I sometimes go back and forth between writing and drawing. And often when I'm, it makes me rethink the story that I'm drawing. It makes me think about the situation they're in, and sometimes like little bits of conversation that they might be having. And so often when so I was going to show you, I have words and then I have little scribbled drawings as well. And the same thing happens when I'm drawing. I am working on a drawing, but I'm also writing down ideas on the side of the page for what might happen in the story.
As we mentioned, you write both picture books and middle grade. What do you like about each, and what do you find most challenging about each?
Well, let's start with picture books. Well, I started out in school. So I started out to be an artist. And so sometimes I feel more confident when I draw than when I write. So I really like drawing the pictures. And I like words too. I think one of the challenging parts for me is when you make a picture book. Are you familiar mostly with people who write novels?
Mostly novels.
Okay. So when you write a picture book, you have to make something called a dummy. Do you know what that is? So it's kind of it's called a dummy in the sense of something being fake, like a crash test dummy or a dummy that is clothes are put on. So when you make a dummy, you make a fake book and you figure out where everything's going to go. This is sort of a dummy that I'm making for a book I'm working on right now. So it's not finished, but it sort of and it shows where a picture will go. And I always have trouble making a whole dummy before I start a picture book, because for me, part of the fun of it is things that surprise me as I go along. So make a dummy that pretty much says what's going to happen, but leaves me space for I didn't think of right away.
What is the hard thing, and what do you like most about writing novels?
One of the things I like is it gives me a chance to get more deeply involved with my characters and have maybe more complicated stories or more developed stories. And I can put lots of, like in a picture book, there aren't that many words, between 600 and 1,000 words. But in a novel, you have room for little facts and little extra fun things that come up along the way. So I like how rich a novel can be in terms of the story. Like I also like wordplay, a hard part about a novel. I know there are challenging parts. I think sometimes in the middle of a novel and I say to myself, how am I going to happen next? And I don't really know. So I think a challenging part is until something tells me what to do next.
What is your process when putting a novel together?
Do you decide the end before the middle?
Or do you put it together in order?
Sometimes when I work on a novel, I start with a couple little chunks that are things that I'm interested in, like done this experiment in science class, but maybe you've seen it where you drop a thread into a solution and crystals form around it. Have you ever seen that happen? I forget what the solution is, but it's something that makes crystals. Anyway, my process for writing a novel, I start with a couple chunks of things I'm really interested in. Other parts seem to grow around them until the different parts kind of grow together. And sometimes, like in Violet and Joby, I knew how I wanted it to end, but I didn't know how I was going to get there.
Writing a book is a big commitment. So when you get an idea for a book, how do you become sure that that's the story you want to tell?
That's a really interesting question. How do I be sure that that's the story I want to tell? Oh, because I start with those little chunks, I think I know that to me or that I really like, and that I end up throwing away. But because I don't know how it's all going to fit together, but I do know that there's a chunk there, a core to the story that I'm really interested in. So I'm committed to figuring out how to share that.
We have interviewed a number of authors who've had books banned.
That means in those places, kids don't have the same access to books that we may have and may not be able to see themselves represented in books.
Can you give us your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that is something that seems to be happening, and it makes me sad to think that there are kids who don't have access to books. I sort of think I grew up, the way I read books was that we had a library, but most of the books there were really old. And then we could have you done book clubs in school where you can order a book or something? So I would get, a couple books every time. And then we had a bookmobile that would come through town. And I would buy books there sometimes. So a lot of the really great books that came out when I was a child, I didn't see when I was a child, but children think they find the things they're looking for, even if adults try to keep them from them. Advocate for letting kids see all kinds of books.
Rejection is a part of most writers' stories.
Okay.
Can you tell us about that part of your journey?
Sure. I have been very lucky in that I have not experienced a ton of that in terms of publishing my books. I started out trying to be an illustrator, and I wrote a little story just to have something to draw pictures of. And I showed my portfolio to an art director, and I said, I have some ideas. And she said, well, send us your ideas. So I typed up the story I had been thinking about, and they wanted to publish it. So my very first story that I wrote, which is pretty unusual, and I feel really lucky about that. The second story was a little bit harder. It took me a couple of tries, but I haven't had that experience that you hear about where people get rejected before they get published.
Can you tell us exactly where you were and your reaction when you found out you won a Newbury medal?
Sure. So before the new medal was announced, my mother called me on the phone. Something you're keeping from us? And I said, no, what do you mean? And her local newspaper list of books they thought might, and my book was on the list. So that was the first time I heard that. I didn't really think about it. I just thought, read that in the newspaper about my book. So that Friday, my editor called and she said, did you know that the midwinter conference is this February? And she said, well, they will announce it on Monday morning at 9:00. Oh, if you haven't heard anything by 9:00, that means you didn't get it. So that was exciting. And I had to ask myself, do I want to spend this thinking about it? No. But if I don't win, this might be the only time I have to think I could win. So my husband and I were building a house, and this house that we're in right now. And he's a big recycler. So a lot of the stuff our house is made of is recycled building materials. So we have these scraping the old paint off of a radiator. And it was the Sunday afternoon, and a cup of coffee, and the sun was shining, and I was scraping a radiator, and I was thinking I might win the Newbury. And so then I made a plan for how I was going to have even if I didn't win. And my plan was to get up early, walk the dog, a very, very long walk with a dog, and it would just be a great day. So they called it, I think it was like 6 or 6:30 in the morning. And, I was awake, but barely. And it was the whole committee was on the phone, and they were all excited. And So I had to get on an airplane that day and fly to New York to be on the Today Show. And it was funny because we were building this house, so we were living in a rental house, and I to go to the laundromat to do some laundry so I could go to New York. And I was taking phone calls from and radio shows and all kinds of people while I was so that I could get on the airplane.
Can you tell us your thoughts and if you are at all concerned about artificial intelligence and its future impact on publishing?
Oh, artificial intelligence. That human beings will always have a more interesting story to tell than artificial intelligence. And I think that human beings will always make more interesting drawing artificial intelligence. But it is pretty mind-blowing to see what it can do. And I has a job that's she does public relations for a community organization, and she thinks it's not a bad thing to have the artificial intelligence do rough drafts of some of her grant proposals. And I suppose that's true. I mean, it seems to me that there are probably enough for it, but I really hope that somehow in the creative world human beings are valued for what we bring, because I just think it's more interesting.
What writer has had the most influence on you?
Well, I've read a lot. One of influential writers when I read books by Kurt Vonnegut, and I think he made a big impact on me because he was contemporary, and he had these ways of describing things that were modern but still really descriptive. The one that I have quoted before is he was describing this woman, and he said, she ransacked her mind for something to say, but all she could find was used Kleenex. And I just thought that was a really funny way to describe not having something to say. So, and I like that he talked about really serious, funny way. So he was one who had a big influence on me.
What advice do you have for young writers?
I think the advice that I have for young writers is the advice that a lot of writers give, which is really good advice, and it's just to read a lot. And also to write a lot. And don't, I have a little, I always have a notebook like this with me. And I use it both for things like what you see right here is my to-do list for today. Here's my Zoom interview. I also write things like every morning I get up. I am a coffee drinker. So every morning I get up and I have a cup of coffee and I sit with my notebook and I usually write something. I write something about, it's interesting to just think about the day before.
That's big advice.
Do you also have a smaller tip for something you do when you are writing
that maybe a lot of people don't?
Well, let's see. One of that I don't remember where I heard this, but I use it and it makes sense to me. Well, actually, I have another one I can tell you. But the one I was going to say first is I think it's a good idea to stop writing in the middle of a sentence. So come back, you know where to start. But the other story that I can tell you, something that really helped me when I was getting started is maybe you've heard of a writer named Daniel Pinkwater.
No,
sadly not.
Writes a lot of kids' books. He was on the radio and he said that he used to go to the bar every day where writers hung out and they would talk about writing. And then one day he realized that a writer isn't somebody who talks about writing. A writer is somebody who was going to sit at his desk for 1 hour. So he said, if you sit there long enough, sooner or later you write something. And so my husband, we decided that I would have regular studio hours. And so ever since then, morning has been my studio. And you get to where you just walk into your space, whatever it is that you have dedicated to your writing or drawing or whatever. The way your mind says, oh, I'm here to write or I'm here to draw. So I think having a regular time, even if it's just a half hour, I think that's a really good idea.
Alan Gratz called it
BIC, butt in chair.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you tell us about a project you are working on now?
Sure. So about 3 years ago, I decided, do either of you know any other languages, or are you learning any other languages?
I'm learning Hebrew.
And right now, school system is teaching us how to speak Spanish.
Yes.
That's so great. And I'm going to tell you, keep doing it, because I learned some Spanish in high school, and then I didn't do it for a long time. And about 3 years ago, I decided I've always wanted to know another language. And I decided if I don't start now, when am I going to do it? So I started with this online program. And then about a year and a half later, I was still doing the online program, but a friend invited us to Guatemala. And while I was there, it was just really interesting. And so I was going to show you. So while I was learning Spanish, I started making little flashcards, but they're kind of fun flashcards. Like I made, this is because Turkey Day is coming up. Pavo is the Spanish word for turkey, and pavo real, word for peacock, means is royal turkey. So different flashcards that I thought were fun. Then I was just thinking about how to share my thoughts about that. So this part of a dummy that I started showing you, very young novel, working on about a girl who travels with her dad and her grandma, American country, to visit an old friend, and they learn some Spanish. So it has some really basic. So it has some basic cards like Buenas noches and various things.
Finally, it's time for Turbo 10.
10 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I think so.
Number 1. What is your favorite phrase to use?
My favorite phrase?
To use, yeah.
Vamos a ver. Vamos a ver, which means we'll see.
Number 2. What is one subject you'd love to learn more about?
Oh, I'm supposed to answer really fast. Cooking.
Number 3. What is your go-to snack food?
My go-to snack food. Plus before a bag of tortilla chips.
Number 4. What was your favorite book growing up?
World Forgotten Door book that I just mentioned.
Number 5. If you could teleport somewhere right now, where would you go?
Oh, where would I go if I could? I think I'd go to Spain.
Number 6. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Oh, dang, I should know this one. What would my superpower be? You know what I think it would be? I think it would be when I see someone who I've met before, that I would remember their name.
Number 7. What was your favorite cartoon as a kid?
Oh, my favorite cartoon. It was part of a cartoon. It was called Fractured Fairy Tales.
Number 8. What is your favorite rainy day activity?
Well, favorite rainy day activity. I love rainy days. I'm one of the people who actually does like walking in the rain.
Number 9. If you could have any 3 dinner guests, who would they be?
Guests?
Dinner guests.
I would have you guys. No, who would I have? Rapid. I would have Yo-Yo Ma, and I would have Kurt Vonnegut. Do they have to be alive right now, or can they be somebody who has died?
No rules.
Okay. Yo-Yo Ma, Kurt Vonnegut, and he's a children's book illustrator, Sydney Smith. And I would just listen to them.
Number 10. What is the best piece of advice you were ever given?
Oh, the best piece of advice I was ever given. Well, it's not going to be the best because I'm just thinking of the first one that comes to mind. But when I was in college, I was all worried about what I was going to do with my future, and I worried that I was never going to get good at this one particular. They said, "Is that the worst thing that could happen?" And I thought to myself, no, it's not. It's not the worst thing that could happen. So I stopped worrying about it.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that.
And thank you so much for spending this time with us.
We can't wait to read your future books.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.